You want answers?
I'm as mad as hell, and I'm not going to take this anymore.
You want answers?
You have offended my family.
I think I'm entitled. You want answers? I want the truth.
And you have offended the Shaolin Temple.
You can't handle the truth.
Surely you can't be serious.
I am serious. And don't call me Shirley.
Radical Rant.
Welcome back, listeners, and I want to talk today about the facts on marijuana and driving. I was turned on to a story from the Huffington Post today, written by Jessica Corey. She's an attorney, and she's with the women's marijuana movement out there in Denver. And she pointed out some things about the push in Colorado to get per se impaired driving standards for cannabis. This would be similar to what we think of as a breathalyzer for alcohol. You know, with alcohol, if you blow above a 0.08 blood alcohol content, they consider you per se impaired. That just means no matter how great you were driving, if you're above 0.08, then you are drunk. Well, they want to have the same thing for marijuana, where if they test your blood and they find the THC is above 5 nanograms per milliliter, they want to consider you too stoned to drive, no matter how great you were driving. So I want to get to the facts on this, and there's no better expert in the United States about these items than Paul Armentano, NORML's deputy director. He's been called to testify many times. He's been part of many scientific committees on this, and there's a great article, or great white paper, I should say, that's available on NORML's website, normal.org. It's called Cannabis and Driving, a Scientific and Rational Review. I encourage anyone who wants to argue about these points, who wants to talk about this, to get this white paper, because not only does it have all the truth written in a very easy way to read and understand, but it's also completely hyperlinked and referenced. All the citations are there to all the studies, so they don't have to take your word for it. You can point to the scientists who've actually studied this thing. Now, as we get started in this rant, let's point out that one of NORML's principles of responsible use is no driving. A person should not be driving and using cannabis. A person should not be driving shortly after using cannabis. It's just not a good idea. Not just from a public safety point of view, but really more from a personal protection point of view. The number one place you're going to ever get busted with marijuana is in your car. It's the number one place where we have interactions with police. So just from a personal protection point of view, it's probably not a good idea to smoke and drive, or to smoke shortly, or to drive shortly after smoking. Nevertheless, the questions still remain about the comparison of marijuana to alcohol. While it has been pretty well demonstrated scientifically that the level of blood alcohol in your body corresponds pretty well to how impaired you might be as a driver, we don't have such evidence with respect to marijuana. So let's take a look at the information that we have. Now, as far as drugged drivers being a causal factor, you know, a lot of times we get these studies, they say, oh, we tested all these people and they tested positive for pot. All these people who got in wrecks tested positive for pot. However, that doesn't tell you whether or not the pot caused the wreck, especially if the test we're looking at is a urine test. And this is the first thing all you reformers out there need to know about drug testing. There are two different ways that are commonly used to detect whether or not a person has been using marijuana. One is a urine test. Now, this is what people are familiar with when they're going out and getting a job, the old pee in a cup test. What they are detecting there is not THC. They are not detecting active marijuana when you are giving a pee test. What they are detecting is a metabolite of THC. Metabolite, all that means is something that's created as a byproduct when your body metabolizes something. So when you smoke pot, you take THC into your body. That THC then causes, you know, whatever, makes you like jam bands, makes you eat too many Cheetos, whatever it is that marijuana causes for you. And then after it's been used, the byproduct, the waste product, if you will, of that is the metabolite. Now, in urine tests, they're testing for THC-COOH, THC-COO, or what we call carboxy-THC. Number one, the fact that there's a metabolite of THC tells you there's no more THC, okay? So when they're detecting carboxy-THC, they're detecting the after effects of someone having used THC. So in a sense, you could actually say that a urine test is an anti-stoned test. It tells when you're not stoned because you can't produce those metabolites until you've already metabolized the THC. And this is something we've talked about many times with respect to workplace drug testing, how inaccurate it is because the THC-CoO molecule, the carboxy-THC molecule, is fat soluble. It'll stay in your body for a long time. People who are infrequent smokers, it may stay in your body for as long as 7 days. If you're a more frequent smoker, it might stay as long as 30 days. If you're an everyday, multi-times-a-day fat toker like me, it could stay in there for 90 days. So it has no bearing on whether or not you are currently impaired when they're detecting carboxy-THC in your urine. But that's not what Colorado's talking about. They're not talking about using urine tests to try to detect whether you're stoned. They're talking about using blood testing. Blood testing is slightly more accurate. What they're testing for in blood testing is THC. They are testing for the active THC that makes you high. And it's been determined here that tests of up to 5 nanograms per milliliter are fairly evident of someone who has used marijuana recently. This is the statement from Paul Armentano. Typically, these studies reveal that drivers who possess a THC blood concentration above 5 nanograms per milliliter imply cannabis inhalation within the past 1 to 3 hours and experience an elevated risk of accident compared to drug-free controls. So science is in on this. If you smoked pot within the past hour to 3 hours, you will test above 5 nanograms per milliliter, and you will likely be impaired as compared to someone who is not using cannabis. However, and this is, again, with this discussion, there's so many howevers here. While the 5 nanograms per milliliter does show that you smoke pot within 1 to 3 hours, and that does show you're more impaired than you would be if you hadn't smoked pot, just how impaired is that? 2 recent case-controlled studies have assessed this risk in detail. Again, according to Paul Armentano's writing in the Cannabis and Driving, the Scientific and Rational Review. A 2007 case-control study published in the Canadian Journal of Public Health reviewed 10 years of U.S. auto fatality data. Investigators found that U.S. drivers with blood alcohol levels of 0.05, and remember, legally drunk is 0.08, so people at 0.05 would not necessarily be considered impaired in America. Those people were 3 times as likely to have engaged in unsafe driving activities prior to a fatal crash as compared to individuals who tested positive for marijuana. Let me rephrase that. People who test at 0.05 have a 3 times greater risk on the road than people who test positive for marijuana. People who are under the legal threshold of alcohol impairment at 0.05 are 3 times more dangerous than people smoking pot for marijuana. That's the 2007 study. In the 2005 review of auto accident fatality data from France, they showed similar results, finding that drivers who tested positive for any amount of alcohol had a 4 times greater risk of having a fatal accident than did drivers who tested positive for marijuana in the blood. And in that study, even drivers with low levels of alcohol present in their blood, below 0.05 on the blood alcohol on the breathalyzer, experienced a greater elevated risk as compared to drivers who tested positive for high concentrations of cannabis above 5 nanograms per milliliter. Both studies noted that overall few traffic accidents appeared to be attributed to drivers operating a vehicle while impaired by cannabis. So, Colorado and other states, there are other states that have this standard, are trying to tell us that if you test above 5 nanograms per milliliter, you're 1/3 as likely to get in an accident as someone who is an alcohol drinker, 1/4 as likely to be in a fatal accident, and yet they want to consider that too impaired by pot to drive. Well, here's the bad news, folks. It may be a political reality that we have to accept. And the problem is that the breathalyzer exists. People don't accept the 0.08 BAC as being something that stops drunk driving. What they accept it as is something that stops drunks from driving. I know it's a weird concept to get your mind around, but the point is, the people don't accept the breathalyzer because it has been proven to have any effect on stopping drunk driving. They just like it because it has the illusion of stopping drunk driving. It's like the pat downs in the airport. It's like pouring out your thing in the airport, right? It doesn't really do anything to stop terrorism, but it makes us all feel better. Well, that's what breathalyzers do. There are plenty of people who can blow above a .08 and drive well. You know, alcoholism is a progressive disease, and one of the hallmarks of alcoholism is tolerance to alcohol. A full-blown alcoholic could blow twice the legal limit, .16, and still be able to pass most field sobriety or driving tests. And yet, with cannabis, we find people drive slower. We find that people who tested on a simulator of driving drove just as well before smoking pot as after smoking pot. But the problem is, it's not about impairment. The breathalyzer isn't trying to stop impairment. It's giving people a magical machine that has a magical number that'll keep us all safe from the drunks. And that's what the voting public wants for marijuana, unfortunately. It's not that they're too worried about people smoking pot. In fact, you find a lot of people these days have the attitude, I just don't care if you want to smoke pot in your house. Hell, we even heard the former drug czar, General Barry McCaffrey, say, hey, if you're in a log cabin in Oregon and you got plants growing out there, hell, I don't care, right? But they always come back to, what about the children and what about the stone drivers? And with respect to the stone drivers, they want to have a magical machine with a magical number that tells you whether or not you're too stoned to drive. Now, normally, this would be something I'd want to fight against, try to get the truth across, but we got to pick our battles. The battle over the breathalyzer has been lost already. We can't come out and say no breathalyzer for pot without saying no breathalyzer for alcohol, and we all know that's not going to happen. The breathalyzer for alcohol is not going anywhere. So we better resign ourselves to the fact there is going to be some sort of scientific test for whether or not we're too stoned to drive, so we need to fight to make sure it's the best possible test from our point of view. This 5 nanograms per milliliter might sound pretty bad until you start looking around some of the other states in this nation that have some of these standards. We have that 5 nanograms per milliliter in Pennsylvania, whereas in Ohio and Nevada, it's 2 nanograms per milliliter. Then we take a look at places like Wisconsin or Iowa, where it's any, and Rhode Island, excuse me, Wisconsin, Iowa, and Rhode Island, where it's any nanograms per milliliter in your blood and you're too stoned to drive. Or take a look at the really draconian states out there, South Dakota and Utah and Arizona, a couple others here, where they have zero tolerance for metabolites. Metabolites in your urine that could be there for 90 days, any tiny amount. You could quit smoking pot today and 90 days from now be a drunk driver in the state of Arizona. And they'll lock you up for 24 hours minimum for that. In Utah, 48 hours minimum if they catch any metabolite in your pee. So given the fact that some of these states are going to push for zero tolerance, we should at least be pushing for something that's reasonable. And I think 5 nanograms per milliliter might be the place to start. I'm Radical Russ. Thanks for joining us here for the show. For Cannabis Carrying Ganja John and everyone here at NORML.org, thanks for supporting NORML. We'll be back here with Hour 2 coming up in just a few seconds. And until next time, take care of each other, tokers.
This is NORML Show Live, the voice of the marijuana nation.
Take it out one more time. You take a seed, you plant it, you grow it, you dry it, you roll it, you smoke it. You take a seed, you plant it, you grow it, you dry it, you roll it, you smoke it. You take a seed, you plant it, you grow it, you dry it, you roll it, you smoke it, and it goes down smooth.
It's 2 o'clock Pacific Standard Time, Pacific Daylight Time. What time is it? I don't care. It's 2 o'clock. Welcome to Toker Talk Radio. It's Standard Time. That's what it is. Another hour of talk here with those of you joining us on Stickam at NORML Show Live. Appreciate you joining us. No Ganja John on today's show, unfortunately. He had to go to the hospital. Nothing serious, folks. Don't worry. He's okay. It's just had to go into the hospital for some testing, some scanning, some IVs, all that kind of stuff. We'll be taking your calls here at 971-533-7111. I know people